redesigning and co-creating one of our modules on our education studies BA programme. So that's like the social sciences of education, basically. The presentation represents all of these people who've been part of that co-creation process. Not everybody could be here today. Lots of them because they've graduated and got jobs, which is kind of lovely. So we were looking at a 30-credit module on diversity and inclusion. And that was a new module at this point because it brought together 2 previous level 5 modules as we went through this process called 2030 of going into block teaching, which we'll come back to in a little while. And why did we feel that it was essential that we were doing something to co-create or to decolonise at this point? So one part of that is the awarding gap that we have at DMU and at many universities, which is still really stark. So we've got a very diverse student body. That's not reflected in the grades that we get. So we see awarding gaps for ethnically minoritized students. We see awarding gaps for our disabled students as well. We were also responding to student feedback, and that kind of links into the next point, which is around student and staff demographics. So the particular group who had told us that they didn't feel represented by what we were currently doing were South Asian women, largely. And that is a huge proportion of our students, and it's a tiny proportion of our teaching staff in the department. And the problem of representing them and the problem of representing the group as a whole was made worse by the fact that we were bringing these 2 15-credit modules together. So previously, I'd led one of those 2 old modules, and I am a queer, autistic, white, middle-class cis woman. The other had been led by one of our other academics who is a mixed heritage black British man who comes from a perspective of Marxism. So already by going to one module with one module leader, we'd already kind of reduced that representation, which we'd already been told wasn't sufficient. The other thing that is an issue in terms of this university in particular is that we've had this very strong Decolonising DMU programme, but as of this year, the funding for that's going to be going. So embedding these practices feels incredibly important at this particular time. And we're also aware of the importance of highlighting things at a stage where we have a government that is trying to silence and reduce some of those voices, particularly around trans rights, particularly around things like teaching critical race theory or teaching about Black Lives Matter. We've seen the UKRI this week under pressure to control what academics are saying. So that's all the kind of context of why this felt important. And there's some practical context to that as well. So I'd kind of had in my head that this was going to need to be a co-created module, and I had experience of doing that because we'd previously co-created our special educational needs and disabilities module, which we'd done in a very kind of slow, considered way, working with a paid group of our disabled and neurodivergent students. And we'd taken that from kind of a research perspective, right through talking to different people. They'd built the entire course, the outcomes, the assessment, and all of that had been done in a very kind of coherent way. The problem that we had at this stage was that we were moving to this block teaching model. And so what that meant in practice, and this is quite apart from all of the issues pedagogically that you might have with block, is that we were forced to revalidate our programs incredibly quickly. Within a space of a few weeks, we were restating those. So there was no possibility of doing a genuine co-creation process before validating those modules. So I was kind of sitting there with the problem that I felt that this wasn't going to be a representative module, but I didn't get to start at the beginning where I wanted to start. So I was mulling that problem, and then I had a chat with Yusraa. Not about that. I had a chat with Yusraa about her dissertation. And she wanted to do a dissertation topic, which if you come to her session this afternoon, you'll hear all about, which was around student loans as a barrier for Muslim students. And I thought, I never thought of that. And if you'd sat me for 3 months, a year, to design a module and think of all the different barriers, I would never have thought of that, because that's not my experience. So the idea that I had to kind of get through some of this is, what if we got some of our students to propose content that they wanted in the modules. And the idea was not for them to co-create necessarily with me, but for me to try to pair them up with other people in the institution who knew about those things and could make it work so that they could co-create those sessions together. In order to get that, this is backtracking on some of the criticisms that I've said before about removal of funding, we got internal funding for the project through what are called academic innovation projects, AIPs, and that meant that we could pay our co-creators, which was essential for me. I'm not going to get anybody working for no money. And it allowed us, if we had any academics who we wanted to work on the project who were PhD students or who were on hourly paid contracts, we could pay some of their time. We also did some library buyout because one of the things that I wanted to think about was making sure that the reading list was decolonised, and we had a little bit of money for purchasing extra resources like particular texts. So basically how it worked, we put a call out to our second and third year students, and they proposed the different topics that they thought would be valuable to be taught within a module on inclusion and diversity. Selecting those topics, initially we'd thought that we were going to take that to our first years, but actually we got the exact number of decent quality proposals as we had places, so we didn't end up going through that process. And then the much more difficult process of finding the collaborators. And the main thing I found, and this is I think an important HE point, is that so many of the academics that I contacted within the institution said, it's a brilliant idea, I love it, I haven't got any time. No, I can't. So it took a long time to find the right people, but I think that we did. So the 5 projects that we had, which each of those has now got content on this new module, was Hadassah Andrews, who has worked with Blessing and with Lamia on racialised students' experiences of mental health and neurodiversity. We had Rose, who was one of our international students, talking about social and emotional learning. We had a change of personnel between the 2 Jesses partway through, but they were working on educational structures and how they might exclude neurodivergence or special educational needs. We had a student called Gillian, who was the parent of a child with a medical condition, talking about barriers to learning for hidden disabilities and medical conditions. And we had Yusraa's project as well. So those were the 5 that we worked on through this. Most of the work happened in their small teams, so it happened very differently for the different groups. But the idea was, once they were paired up with the academics or the experts who could work with them, that they would work together to build the content of those sessions. As part of that, we did things like library training around searching for materials. We did 2 workshops altogether, one sharing our initial ideas and then one much later on testing out some of the things we were working on. We did some training on how to make your resources accessible. And then we spent time also, occasionally they would check in with me or do reflection as well. So at this point, we have most of those sessions planned. Yusraa's is good to go, Hadassah's is good to go, Rose's is good to go. Interestingly, it's the ones on disability that aren't yet completed. And I think that reflects that this more kind of fluid, less structured co-creation project wasn't necessarily well designed for people managing disability. So that's something I need to reflect on later. And so we're currently kind of integrating all of that into the module. And then next year, I'm now sharing the module leadership with Lamia, so she and I will be teaching the material and then doing evaluation, including student feedback and writing for publication on that.